The twin suns of Verdun 7 were setting. Behind the purple mountains went 8-year-old Marcus Chen heard the strange sound coming from. Behind the water processing planet was not a sound he had ever heard. Before a deep rumbling mixed with something that reminded him of his mother crying late at night, when she thought no one could hear. Marcus was a curious boy, and curiosity was stronger than fear in his young heart. So he walked toward the sound with his small hands tucked into his jacket pockets. What he found there changed everything. Behind the massive metal tanks and pipes of the processing plant, curled into a ball larger than his family's entire housing unit, was a creature of legend, a Dracoth. Marcus had seen pictures of them in his school lessons, and his brother Ethan had told him stories about these magnificent beings who sailed between the stars. On wings made of living crystal, they were ancient beyond imagining, older than most civilizations in the galaxy, and they were said to be proud and powerful and terrible in their beauty. But this one was not proud or powerful right now. This one was crying. Her scales were the color of deep space, black with hints of purple and blue that shimmered when the fading sunlight touched them, and her eyes were like pools of liquid amber, each one bigger than Marcus himself. Those great eyes were filled with tears that fell like glowing raindrops onto the dusty ground around her. Lay scattered pieces of something that looked like broken glass. But it was not glass. It was something far more precious and far more tragic. Marcus walked closer, and the dragon lifted her massive head to look at him. "Go away, small creature," she said, and her voice was like thunder rolling through deep caves. But there was no anger in it, only sorrow so heavy that Marcus could feel it pressing against his chest. "Why are you crying?" Marcus asked, because that seemed like the most important question. The dragon stared at him for a long moment, perhaps surprised that this tiny being showed no fear, perhaps too tired to care. "I'm Sirthi," she said at last. "And I'm dying." Marcus looked at her carefully, the way his brother had taught him to look at broken machines, searching for what was wrong, what was missing, what needed to be fixed. "You do not look sick," he said. "Not that kind of dying," Sirthi replied, and she gestured with one great clawed hand toward the scattered fragments around her. "My flight membrane is destroyed, and without it, I cannot fly between the stars. And a Dracoth who cannot fly is not truly alive." Marcus walked over to one of the fragments and picked it up carefully. It was lighter than he expected, and it glowed softly in his hands with colors that seemed to shift and dance, blues and greens and purples that reminded him of the auroral lights that sometimes appeared in the colony's sky. "What happened to it?" he asked. "Pirates," Sirthi said, and her voice grew harder with the memory. "They attacked me near the asteroid belt, and their ion cannon tore through my membrane before I could escape. And I crashed here on this world, and now I am trapped forever. Can you not grow a new one?" Sirthi made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "You know nothing of my kind, little human. So I will explain. A Dracoth flight membrane is not like your hair or your fingernails that grow back when cut. It is a living crystal structure that takes 300 years to form, and it is encoded with star maps and memories passed down through generations. And once it is shattered, it is gone forever." She lowered her great head to the ground, and more glowing tears fell from her amber eyes. "The greatest scientists in the Galactic Concord have studied our membranes for thousands of years, and they all agree on one thing: they cannot be repaired. They cannot be rebuilt. They cannot be recreated. And so when a Dracoth loses their wings, they lose everything." Marcus sat down on a rock near her head, still holding the fragment of crystal in his small hands. "How old are you?" he asked. "I have lived for 347 of your years," Sirthi replied. "I am still young by the standards of my people, and I had hoped to see so much more of the universe. But now I will see nothing except this small colony world until I fade away. What do you mean, fade away? Dracarith do not die like other beings, Scifistories explained. When we lose our purpose, when we lose our reason to live, we simply grow quieter and stiller until one day we become like stone. And eventually, even the stone crumbles to dust. And we are gone. Marcus thought about this for a while. Turning the crystal fragment over and over in his hands, he thought about the time his mother had gotten sick and the doctors had said there was nothing they could do, and how scared he had been, and how his brother Ethan had stayed up for days and nights, reading and researching and building something in his workshop, and then his mother had gotten better, he thought about the time the colony's main reactor had failed, and the company that owned the colony had said it was too damaged to fix and they should all evacuate, and how his brother had gone into that reactor with his tools and his stubborn refusal to give up. The reactor had worked again. Marcus stood up and began gathering the scattered crystal fragments, putting them carefully into his jacket pocket. Scifistories watched him with confusion in her ancient eyes. What are you doing? Small one? I am collecting the pieces, Marcus said. Why would you do that? They are worthless now. Just broken remnants of what was once beautiful. Marcus looked up at the great dragon, and there was something in his young face that made Scifistories pause. A certainty that seemed too large for such a small being. Do not cry, Marcus said, and his voice was gentle but firm. My elder brother can repair it. Scifistories stared at him in her 347 years. She had traveled to 1,000 worlds and met 10,000 beings of every shape and size and level of intelligence. And never had she heard anyone say something so impossible with such complete and total belief. Little human, she said slowly. Did you not hear what I told you? The greatest minds in the galaxy cannot repair a Dracarith membrane. My brother is not the greatest mind in the galaxy, Marcus agreed. But he is the best at fixing things, and he never gives up. And he always finds a way. You truly believe this? It was not a question. But Marcus answered anyway. I know it, he said, because Ethan has never let me down. And he has never let anyone down who needed his help. And you need help. So he will help you. Scifistories did not know what to say. She had seen the cold logic of the Veluxi, who calculated everything and never wasted effort on lost causes. And she had seen the resignation of the Kreth, who accepted fate as unchangeable. And she had seen the detachment of the Silicon Minds, who viewed organic suffering as merely data. But she had never seen this small creature with absolute faith in his brother, gathering broken pieces of an impossible puzzle as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Will you come with me? Marcus asked. My house is not far, and my brother will want to see the pieces while they are still fresh. Every logical part of Scifistories' mind told her this was foolish, that she should send the boy away and accept her fate with dignity. But somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had forgotten existed, something stirred. It felt like hope. And so Scifistories, ancient dragon of the stars, grounded wanderer of the cosmos, rose to her feet and followed an 8-year-old human boy through the dusty streets of a frontier colony, because he had looked at her tears and said the most impossible thing she had ever heard, and somehow, impossibly, she wanted to believe him. The walk through the colony took longer than Marcus had expected because Scifistories had to move slowly and carefully to avoid crushing the small buildings and vehicles that lined the narrow streets. People stopped and stared as they passed a tiny human boy leading a dragon the size of a cargo ship through their quiet frontier town. Some ran away in fear, and some called out warnings, and some simply stood frozen with their mouths hanging open. But Marcus paid no attention to any of them because he had a mission. And when Marcus had a mission, nothing could distract him. His mother always said he got that from Ethan. Scifistories watched the humans around her with curious eyes as she walked, noting how different they were from what she had expected. She had encountered humans before, Of course, they had spread across the galaxy in the last few centuries, like seeds scattered by the wind, appearing on world after world with their strange mixture of fragility and determination, but she had never really paid attention to them, to a being who had lived for 300 years. Humans seemed so brief, so temporary, like sparks that flared and faded in the blink of an eye. What could such short-lived creatures possibly understand about loss that stretched across centuries? About wings that took longer to grow than entire human civilizations rose and fell? And yet this small one walked beside her with such confidence, such certainty that his brother could do what the greatest minds in the galaxy had declared impossible. "Tell me about your brother," Sirthi said as they turned down a street lined with prefabricated housing units. Marcus smiled, and his whole face lit up like the twin suns rising. "Ethan is the smartest person I know," he said. "But he does not act smart the way some people do. Like they want everyone to know how much they know. He just likes to understand how things work and how to make them work better." "Is he a scientist?" "He is an engineer," Marcus said, "which is like a scientist, but more useful. At least that is what he says. Scientists figure out why things are broken, but engineers figure out how to fix them. And he has fixed many things?" "So many things," Marcus said, and he began counting on his fingers. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's water recycler when the company said she needed to buy a new one. And he fixed the school's teaching computer when it stopped showing pictures. And he fixed Mr. Tanaka's hover cart when it would only go in circles. And he fixed— "I understand," Sirthi interrupted gently. "He has fixed many small machines, not just small things," Marcus said. And there was a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "He fixed our mother's heart." Sirthi slowed her pace. "What do you mean?" "She was very sick," Marcus said, and his voice grew quieter. "The doctors said her heart was damaged, and there was nothing they could do except give her medicine that would make her comfortable until she was not sick anymore in a different way. They thought she would die." Marcus nodded, and his small hands tightened into fists at his sides. But Ethan would not accept that. And he read everything he could find about hearts and how they work and how they break. And he talked to doctors on other worlds through the communication network. And he stayed awake for so many nights that I lost count. "What did he do?" "He built something," Marcus said. "I do not understand exactly what it was. Something small that went inside her chest and helped her heart beat the right way. And the doctors said it should not work, that it was too simple, that hearts were too complicated for such a thing. But it worked. It worked," Marcus confirmed. "And now Mom is healthy again, and she says Ethan gave her a second life." Sirthi was quiet for a long moment. Processing this information, she had seen the great medical facilities of the Galactic Concord. The gleaming hospitals where beings far more advanced than humans performed procedures that seemed like magic. And she knew that fixing a human heart was not the same as fixing a Dracarys flight membrane, but there was something in the boy's story that made her uncertain. Something about the way humans approach problems that was different from other species. "Your brother sounds remarkable," she finally said. "He is," Marcus agreed simply. "And he will help you because that is what he does. He helps people who need help." They arrived at a small housing unit near the edge of the colony. No different from the hundreds of others, except for the larger structure attached to its side, a workshop. Sirthi realized, with doors big enough to fit vehicles. "Wait here," Marcus said. "I will get Ethan." Sirthi settled down onto the ground, curling her tail around herself and watching as the small human disappeared through a door that seemed almost comically tiny compared to her around her. She could see other colonists gathering at a safe distance, pointing and whispering. And she wondered what they were saying, probably discussing whether she was dangerous, whether they should call for security, whether they should be afraid. She was too tired to care. The journey here after her wings were destroyed had taken everything she had, and the grief of her loss was a weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. and she still did not truly believe that anything could be done to help her, but she had come this far. And she would see it through the door opened again, and Marcus emerged, followed by a young human male who was taller than Marcus, but still impossibly small compared to... Sirathi had dark hair that stuck up in messy spikes, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. And his hands, she noticed his hands especially, were stained with oil and covered in small scars from years of working with tools and machines, but his eyes were sharp and curious, and when he looked at her, she did not see fear or awe or the hungry look of someone who wanted to study her like a specimen. She saw interest, the same kind of interest she had seen in Marcus when he first found her. "So you are the dragon my brother has been telling me about," Ethan said. And he walked right up to her without hesitation and looked at her damaged wing structure with the same casual assessment he might give a broken engine. "I am Sirathi of the Void Wanderers," she said, using her full title without really knowing why. "And I must tell you that what your brother has promised is impossible." Ethan glanced at Marcus with a raised eyebrow. "What did you promise?" "I told her you could fix her wings," Marcus said, pulling the crystal fragments from his pockets and holding them out. Ethan took one of the fragments and held it up to the fading light, turning it slowly, watching the colors shift and dance within its structure. "Dracarith flight membrane," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "I have read about these living crystal matrix, bioluminescent properties. Contains encoded genetic and navigational data. Fascinating. It cannot be repaired," Sirathi said firmly. "The greatest scientists in the... Yeah. Marcus told me," Ethan interrupted, still studying the fragment. "The greatest scientists in the Galactic Concord have declared it impossible, and the knowledge is lost. And once it is broken forever. Then you understand." Ethan looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes that she did not recognize, something that looked almost like amusement mixed with determination. "I understand that a lot of very smart beings have given up," he said, "but that does not mean it cannot be done. It just means no one has done it yet. You think you can succeed where the greatest minds in the galaxy have failed?" "I do not know," Ethan admitted, "but I know I will not find out by giving up before I try." He turned to Marcus and smiled, ruffling his little brother's messy hair. "You did good bringing her here," he said. "Now help me gather all the pieces, and let us see what we can figure out." Sirathi watched the two human brothers begin collecting the scattered fragments of her destroyed membrane, working together with an ease that spoke of long practice. And she felt something strange stirring in her chest. It was not hope. She was not ready to hope yet, but it was something close to it, something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, these small and brief and impossible creatures might be exactly what she needed. Ethan's workshop was chaos given form, a space where broken things came to be reborn and impossible ideas took shape in metal and wire, and light shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, crammed with tools and components and half-finished projects that waited patiently for their creator to return to them. In one corner sat the remains of a hover engine, its guts spread across a workbench like a mechanical autopsy, and in another corner hung a suit of salvaged space armor that Ethan had been slowly restoring for the past 2 years. There were alien devices mixed with human technology, pieces of Veluxy computing units tangled with Kreth communication arrays. All of it gathered and saved because Ethan never threw anything away that might someday be useful. Marcus had cleared a space on the largest workbench, and now the fragments of Sirathi's flight membrane lay spread across it like pieces of a puzzle that no one had ever solved. Sirathi herself could not fit inside the workshop, so she lay curled outside the wide doors, her great head resting on the threshold so she could watch what was happening within. She had told herself she was only watching out of curiosity, that she did not really expect anything to come of this. But her amber eyes followed Ethan's every movement with an intensity that betrayed her true feelings. Ethan stood before the workbench, hands on his hips, studying the fragments, with the focused concentration of a general surveying a battlefield. "Tell me everything you know about these membranes," he said, without looking away from the pieces. "What do you wish to know?" "Everything, how they form, what they are made of, how they work, why they cannot be repaired, everything." Surathi was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "The membrane begins to form when a Dracarith is still in the egg," she said. "It grows alongside us, fed by our body's energy and shaped by our genetic code. And it takes 300 years to fully develop." 300 years, Ethan repeated. "That is a long time for a human." "Perhaps for us it is simply the beginning of life." Ethan picked up one of the larger fragments and held it under a magnifying lens, peering at its internal structure. "What is it made of?" "We call it starweave, though your scientists have given it a longer and more complicated name. It is a crystalline matrix that is both organic and inorganic, alive and not alive, and it responds to our thoughts and our will, so it is connected to your nervous system." "In a way," Surathi said. "The membrane is part of us, an extension of our being. And through it, we can feel solar winds and the magnetic fields of stars and the pull of gravity from distant worlds. It is how we navigate the void between systems." Ethan set down the fragment and picked up another. Comparing them side by side, "You said it contains encoded data star maps and memories." "Yes, when a membrane is fully grown, it contains the collected knowledge of our ancestors, passed down through generations. And we add our own experiences to it as we travel. So when your membrane was destroyed, I lost more than my wings." Surathi finished, and her voice was heavy with grief. "I lost the voices of my forebears, the maps of paths I had yet to travel, the memories of journeys I will never take." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I am sorry I did not realize how much you lost. Now you understand why repair is impossible," Surathi said. "Even if you could somehow put the pieces back together, the data is corrupted, the connections are severed. The life is gone. It would be like trying to bring back the dead." Ethan set down the fragments and walked to a shelf, pulling down a battered notebook filled with handwritten notes and sketches. "When I was fixing my mother's heart," he said, flipping through the pages, "the doctors told me the same thing. They said the damage was too severe. The tissue was dead. The connections were severed. What did you do?" "I did not try to bring back what was dead," Ethan said. "I built something new that could do the same job." He turned back to the workbench and began arranging the fragments in a pattern, grouping them by size and color and the way the light moved through them. "I am not going to regrow your membrane. You are right that I cannot do that, but maybe I can find a way to reconnect what is broken, to bridge the gaps, to give the pieces a new way to work together. That is," Surathi began, then stopped. She had been about to say impossible again, but the word felt hollow now. "It is worth trying," she said. Instead, Ethan grinned. And in that moment, he looked very much like his little brother. That is the spirit. What followed was the longest 3 days of Surathi's life. She watched as Ethan worked without rest, barely pausing to eat the food Marcus brought him, forgetting to sleep until his body simply refused to continue, and he collapsed at his workbench for a few hours before waking and starting. Again, he tried hundreds of different approaches. He experimented with adhesives and polymers and bonding agents, testing each one on small fragments and watching them fail again and again. Studied the crystalline structure under every kind of light and scan, mapping its internal patterns until he knew them better than the lines on his own hands. He reached out through the communication network to scientists and engineers on other worlds, asking questions and gathering information and ignoring the ones who told him he was wasting his time, and every time an experiment failed, every time a bond did not hold or a connection refused to form, he simply noted what went wrong and tried something different. Marcus stayed with him through most of it, fetching tools and bringing food and keeping Sirathi company during the long hours when Ethan was too focused to speak. "Is he always like this?" Sirathi asked on the second night, watching Ethan mutter to himself as he mixed another batch of experimental solution. "Only when it matters," Marcus said, and there was pride in his young voice. "When something really matters." Ethan does not know how to give up. That could be seen as stubbornness. Mom calls it determination, Marcus said with a smile on the third day. Sirathi was beginning to lose faith again. She had watched 92 attempts fail. 92 times when Ethan had been sure he was close, only to watch the fragments refuse to bond or the crystals reject the foreign materials. She was preparing herself to tell the young human that it was time to stop, that he had tried his best, and she was grateful, but some things truly could not be fixed. And then she saw Ethan's hands freeze over the workbench. "Marcus," he said, and his voice was strange tight with something that might have been excitement or fear or both. "Bring me the container with the purple lid, the one from the back shelf." Marcus scrambled to obey. Returning with a small jar filled with silvery powder, Ethan took it and added a careful measure to the solution he had been preparing, stirring it slowly and watching the color change from clear to a soft blue that reminded Sirathi of the light that used to shine from her membrane. "What is that?" she asked. "Something I made last year," Ethan said. "I was trying to create a flexible conductor for a project that never went anywhere, and I ended up with this. It is not quite liquid and not quite solid, and it can carry both electrical signals and data." He drew some of the solution into a thin applicator and carefully injected it into one of the crystal fragments. Nothing happened, then nothing continued to happen, and then the fragment pulsed with light, not the weak, fading light of a dying thing, but a strong and steady glow that reminded Sirathi of what her membrane had looked like when it was whole and alive. She surged forward, nearly crushing the workshop door frame in her eagerness, her amber eyes fixed on that tiny glowing piece of herself. "It is working," she breathed. Ethan held up the fragment, and his exhausted face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on a human. 93rd time is the charm," he said. "Now let us see if we can do the same thing to the rest of them." For the first time in months, Sirathi felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hope, real hope, burning bright and warm in her chest like a newborn star, and it had come from the hands of a human who simply refused to accept that anything was truly beyond repair. Word of what was happening in the small frontier colony spread faster than light itself. It traveled through communication networks and trade routes, whispered from ship to ship and world to world, until it reached the ears of beings who had never heard of Verdun 7 and certainly had never heard of a human engineer named Ethan Chun. A human was attempting to repair a Dracarith flight membrane. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Juntostio from the great universities sent messages demanding to know what methods were being used, and most of them were convinced it was a hoax or a misunderstanding. Took elders from the ancient homeworld of Ashkari sent warnings that such attempts were blasphemy, that the membrane was sacred and should not be touched by outsider hands. The Galactic Concord dispatched official observers to document what they were certain would be a failure, so that the matter could be settled once and for all. Ships began arriving at Verdun 7, small vessels and large ones, carrying scientists and journalists and the simply curious, until the tiny colony's landing pads were overflowing and ships had to park in the surrounding desert. Marcus thought it was exciting to see so many different aliens in one place. Tall, thin Veluxi with their compound eyes, clusters of Kreth that moved and spoke as one, gleaming silicon mines that floated on anti-gravity fields. Sarathi found it exhausting. She had never liked being the center of attention, and now she was being watched constantly by thousands of eyes. Studied and analyzed and debated like a scientific specimen, but she endured it because Ethan needed her to endure it. The work had entered a new phase now that the initial breakthrough had been made, and it was slow and delicate and required absolute precision. Ethan had figured out how to reactivate the individual fragments, but connecting them together was a different challenge entirely. Each piece of the membrane had to be aligned perfectly with the others, matched by the patterns in its crystalline structure, and bonded using a careful mixture of his special solution and proteins harvested from Sarathi's own shed scales. She had offered the scales willingly, scraping them from her body with her claws, and Ethan had processed them in his workshop to extract the organic compounds that would help the fragments recognize each other as parts of a whole. It is like doing a puzzle, he explained to Marcus one evening. Both of them hunched over the workbench while Sarathi watched from outside. But the pieces keep changing shape, and there is no picture to show me what the finished result should look like. How do you know if you are doing it right? Marcus asked. I don't, Ethan admitted. I just have to pay attention to how the pieces react to each other and make adjustments as I go. The Concord observers watched everything with cold analytical eyes, taking notes and recording data. And sometimes they would approach Ethan with questions that were clearly designed to find flaws in his methods. Your approach is entirely unscientific, one of them said on the fifth day. A Veluxy researcher whose multifaceted eyes glittered with skepticism. You are not following any established protocols or building on any peer-reviewed research. That is because there is no established protocol for this, Ethan replied without looking up from his work. And all the peer-reviewed research says it cannot be done. So following that research would mean giving up. You humans have such an inflated sense of your own abilities, the Veluxy said. What makes you think you can succeed where beings far more intelligent and experienced have failed? Ethan finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes that made the Veluxy take a step back. I don't think I am smarter than anyone, he said quietly. I just think that sometimes the smartest people are so busy explaining why something cannot be done that they never actually try to do it. The Veluxy had no response to that day by day. The fragments came together. Ethan worked in sections, bonding small groups of pieces into larger structures, testing each connection to make sure it was stable before moving on. The process was painfully slow. What took hours of careful work often resulted in a bonded section, no larger than Marcus's hand, but progress was being made. And then came the problem of the lost data. Sarathi's membrane had contained star maps and ancestral memories, navigation routes that stretched across the galaxy. And all of that information had been corrupted when the membrane shattered. Ethan could repair the physical structure, but the data itself was fragmented and incomplete. Like a book that had been torn apart and scattered by the wind. I cannot restore what I do not have, he told Sarathi late one night, exhaustion written in every line of his face. I can rebuild the container, but I cannot recreate what was inside. Sarathi was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars that glittered in the night sky above the colony. Perhaps you do not need to, she said slowly. What do you mean? The star maps in my membrane were given to me by my ancestors, Sarathi explained. They showed me paths that others had traveled before, routes that were safe and known, but I always wondered what it would be like to find my own paths, to explore without a map, to discover rather than follow. Ethan tilted his head. Considering this, you want to start fresh? I want to start new, Sarathi said. I have lost the voices of my ancestors, and I grieve for that loss, but perhaps losing the old maps means I can create new ones. And perhaps the memories I make from this day forward will be enough. Ethan smiled. and some of the tension left his shoulders. "That makes my job a lot easier," he said. "But are you sure once the membrane is sealed? I cannot go back and add the old data later." "I am sure," Sirathi said. And she was surprised to find that she meant it. The Dracarith have always believed that we must carry the past with us or be lost, but maybe being lost is just another word for being free to find a new way. Ethan nodded, returned to his work with renewed energy. The final assembly took 3 more days. Ethan used astronomical records borrowed from 7 different species to create a basic framework of navigation data, not the ancient maps of Sirithi's ancestors, but a new foundation she could build upon with her own journeys. He integrated the rebuilt membrane sections into a single structure, reinforcing the bonds with additional layers of his special solution, creating a lattice of silver-blue threads that wound through the crystal. Like veins of light, the Dracarith elders who watched called it an abomination, a corruption of something pure and sacred. The scientists who watched called it unprecedented, impossible, a breakthrough that would be studied for generations. But to Sirathi, watching as her new wings took shape in the hands of this small and stubborn human, it was none of those things. It was beautiful. It was hope. Given form, it was the impossible made real by someone who had simply refused to believe that impossible was a permanent condition. And when Ethan finally stepped back from the completed membrane, swaying on his feet from exhaustion, his hands trembling and his eyes barely able to stay open, Sirathi lowered her great head and pressed her snout gently against his chest. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for what she was feeling. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Ethan smiled. And it was the tired smile of someone who had given everything he had. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "We still have to see if it works." The morning of the test arrived with clear skies and gentle winds, as if the planet itself wanted to give Sirathi the best possible chance of success. The colony's main landing platform had been cleared of all ships and vehicles, and crowds had gathered on every rooftop and hillside within viewing distance. Thousands of beings who had traveled from across the sector to witness what many still believed was impossible. Sirathi stood at the edge of the platform, a newly repaired membrane catching the light of Verdun 7's twin suns. Silver blue threads of Ethan's work wove through the crystal like rivers of starlight, visible but not ugly, different from what she had once been, but beautiful in a new way. She flexed her wings experimentally, feeling the membrane respond to her thoughts for the first time in months. And the sensation brought tears to her amber eyes. Not tears of sorrow this time, but tears of joy. Marcus stood beside her, his small hand resting against her massive foreleg, and Ethan stood just behind him, arms crossed and face calm despite the tension that Sirathi could see in the set of his shoulders. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked. "Strange," Sirathi admitted. "Different from before, lighter somehow, and there are parts that feel unfamiliar. Like wearing clothes that do not quite fit. Bad different or good different?" Sirathi considered the question carefully. "New different," she finally said. "I do not know yet if it will be good or bad." The Concord observers had set up recording equipment all around the platform, capturing every moment from multiple angles. And the Dracarith elders watched from a nearby hillside with expressions that mixed disapproval with reluctant curiosity. Everyone was waiting. Sirathi looked down at the 2 human brothers who had changed her fate. This small child who had found her crying and refused to let her cry alone. This young man who had worked himself to exhaustion for a stranger simply because she needed help. "I do not know how to thank you for what you have done," she said. "You can thank us by flying," Ethan said. And he smiled, that tired, gentle smile that she had come to know so well. "That is why we did all this. And if it does not work, then we will figure out what went wrong and try again." Ethan said simply, as if the answer was obvious. That is how it works. You try, you fail, you learn, you try again. And if it never works, then we keep trying until we run out of ideas, Marcus said, his young voice fierce with conviction, because giving up is not allowed. Sirthi laughed, a deep rumbling sound that rolled across the platform like gentle thunder. You humans are impossible, she said, but there was warmth in her voice. We prefer determined, Ethan said, or stubborn. Marcus added with a grin. Sirthi drew a deep breath and turned to face the open sky. The solar winds were calling to her, singing in frequencies that only a Dracarith could hear, inviting her to dance among the stars as her ancestors had done for countless generations. Her new membrane trembled in response, and she felt the pathways that Ethan had rebuilt lighting up with energy. Responding to her will in ways both familiar and strange, she spread her wings wide, and the crowd fell silent, the membrane stretched taut, crystal and starlight catching the morning sun. And Sirthi felt something she had not felt since the day she crashed on this world. She felt connected, whole, ready. Here I go, she whispered, and then she leaped for one terrible moment. Nothing happened. She rose into the air on the strength of her legs alone, and her wings caught only empty air. And she felt the cold grip of failure reaching for her heart. Then the membrane flared with light. The silver blue threads pulsed in perfect synchronization, channeling energy through the crystal matrix. And suddenly she could feel the solar winds wrapping around her like the arms of an old friend. She rose higher and higher, spiraling up into the morning sky, her wings carrying her with strength she had never known before, different from her old membrane. Yes, but not weaker. If anything, Ethan's repairs had made her stronger. The hybrid structure more efficient at capturing the solar winds than pure Dracarith crystal alone. She climbed until the colony below was just a tiny cluster of shapes, until she could see the curve of the planet's horizon, until the atmosphere grew thin and the stars became visible even in daylight. And then she flew as she had not flown in months, dancing through the sky with joy and abandon, testing her new wings in loops and spirals and sudden dives that made her heart race with exhilaration. The membrane held every bond remained secure, every connection stayed stable. Every thread of silver blue light pulsed with steady energy as she pushed herself harder and faster. She could fly. Cheers from the crowd below reached her even at that height. Thousands of voices raised in celebration, but one sound rose above the rest. The excited shouting of a young human boy who was jumping up and down and waving his arms. Marcus Sirthi laughed again, letting her joy ring out across the sky, and then she turned and dove back toward the planet, spiraling down in a controlled descent that brought her back to the landing platform. In a rush of wind and light, she landed gracefully, tucking her wings against her body, and immediately lowered her great horned head to the ground before the two human brothers. It was a gesture of deep respect, one that no Dracarith had offered to another species in 6,000 years. And the elders watching from the hillside went very still. Little human, Sirthi said, her voice carrying across the platform for all to hear. You found me when I had lost everything. You saw my tears, and your first thought was not fear, not curiosity, not how you might profit from my misfortune, but how you might help. She turned her amber gaze to Marcus, who was staring up at her with shining eyes. You said to me, "Do not cry. My elder brother can repair it," and I did not believe you, because how could I believe such an impossible thing? Her voice grew stronger, deeper, filled with emotion that resonated through every being present. But you believed it. You believed it with your whole heart. And because of your faith, I followed you. And because I followed you, I found your brother. She turned to Ethan, who looked embarrassed by all the attention, but held her gaze steadily. And you took the broken pieces of a stranger's hope and worked for days without sleep. Tried again and again when failure seemed certain. Refused to surrender, even when the greatest minds in the galaxy told you it could not be done. Ethan shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You needed help, he said, as if that explained everything. Yes, Surathi agreed. I needed help. And that was enough for you. That was all the reason you required. She rose to her full height, spreading her wings wide so that the assembled crowd could see the evidence of Ethan's work. The silver-blue threads woven through her crystal membrane like rivers of light. I have traveled the stars for more than 300 years, she declared, her voice rolling across the platform like thunder. I have seen wonders that would break the minds of lesser beings, and I have witnessed horrors that haunt my dreams to this day, but I have never, in all my journeys, encountered anything quite like humanity. The Dracarith elders leaned forward, listening intently. When my people first learned of humans, we dismissed them as insignificant, short-lived creatures who would burn bright and fade away, like sparks in the void. But we were wrong. Surathi's amber eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the humans and aliens alike who had gathered to watch. Humans are small, yes, fragile by the standards of many species, with lifespans that seem impossibly brief, but they carry within them something that larger and longer-lived beings often lack. She looked down at Marcus and Ethan. They carry faith, not blind faith, but the stubborn belief that things can be made better, that problems can be solved, that broken things can be fixed, and they combine that faith with a willingness to work, to fail, to try again, to never stop trying as long as there is even the smallest chance of success. Her voice softened, becoming almost gentle. A child looked at a grieving dragon and said, "Do not cry. My brother can fix it," and he was right. Not because his brother was the smartest or the most powerful being in the galaxy, but because his brother was human, and humans do not know how to give up on someone who needs them. She spread her wings one final time, letting them catch the light. I will carry this story with me wherever I go. I will tell every being I meet what happened here on this small colony world. What a human child's faith and a human engineer's determination accomplished against all odds. She looked up at the sky, at the stars that waited for her, at the universe that was once again open to her exploration. And when humanity finally reaches the deep void, when they spread out among the stars, as they surely will, they will find the Dracarith waiting for them, not as strangers, not as obstacles, but as friends and allies who remember what one small family did for one lost dragon. She lowered her head once more, touching her snout gently to Marcus's chest. "Thank you, little one," she whispered, "for believing when I had forgotten how." Marcus wrapped his small arms as far around her snout as they would go, hugging her with all his might. "You will come back and visit, right?" he asked. "I will," Surathi promised. "I will return to this world again and again, as long as these wings will carry me, because this is where I learned that even the most broken things can be made whole again." She stepped back, spread her wings, and launched herself into the sky one final time. As she rose higher and higher, she looked down at the two small figures standing on the platform.